Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Zach Rubin and we're here today with Dr. Bernard Roth, who will be sharing lessons from several decades working in design thinking to solve problems and make our lives better. Thanks so much for joining us today, Dr. Roth.
Sure.
There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation, so if you have anything you'd like to ask Dr. Roth, please just click the Ask a Question button. And I'll give a quick introduction and then Dr. Roth can take it away. Dr. Roth has taught courses in creativity and design thinking for more than 40 years, and he's the co-founder of the cutting-edge design school known as the D.school at Stanford. Roth is also the author of the popular book, The Achievement Habit, Stop Wishing, Start Doing, and Take Command of Your Life, which is linked in the resources section of the page for anyone interested in diving into more of applying design thinking to their own lives. Dr. Roth, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for signing up. The purpose of today's talk, as far as I'm concerned, the main objective is to give you some simple tools with which to solve problems and to assist you, hopefully, of having a good life. So I must say that my book title, The Achievement Habit, I have a friend who said I'd never buy a book with achievement in the title. And some people are put off by that, some people love it. But actually what I mean by achievement is really having a good life. I say if your friends don't have to lie when they eulogize you after you die, then you've had a good life probably. So anyway, that's sort of the realm in which I'm going to be taking you. But the tools I'm going to give you are really simple. I've used them for many years with students and they do work. I've used it with people all around the world. So the main idea is problem solving. Well, people think of problems in a negative way, and that's the problem with the word. But in fact, the problems are a life force. If you have no problems in the world, probably you don't get out of bed. There's a great book written right after the Crimean War in Tsarist Russia, where the hero is of someone called Oblomov. And the book is a parody showing the decadence of the landowning class in Tsarist Russia. And this guy essentially doesn't get out of bed for the first 200 some pages of the book. And the reason is, well, why bother getting out of bed? Everything's taken care of and he has servants and so forth. Ultimately, his life turns poor. But basically, the idea is if you don't have problems, there's not much you're going to do. So what I think about, and in Silicon Valley, what people do is they say problems are opportunities, and the bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. So I'm not going to go there. You might have an opinion about that one way or the other, but the point simply is we all have problems and we all deal with that, and that's part of what makes life. And in my case, if I have a problem, I really get a lot of energy from it. I don't sleep as much, I get up earlier, I'm engaged in getting it handled. And I want to show you about that. So one of the things is to understand that the solution to the problem is strongly influenced by the problem you think you're going to solve. In my business, we call it POV, point of view, but that's essentially just a technical name for a problem statement. And whether you have it consciously or subconsciously, you really are after some area that you're trying to solve. And we found that it's really useful to kind of put a little energy into creating a point of view, because it focuses what your biases are, and it also lets you understand where you're really going. And it turns out that's a real crucial part of the process. So one formal way of doing it, which not everyone does, but just to show you a possible way, you look for a phrase describing the specific user. If you're solving a problem for yourself, then it would be Bernie Roth, a Stanford professor, so forth. But if you, in many of our work at the D School, we're solving problems for other people, some in different countries around the world. So the question is who specifically, but think of a specific user, and that's really useful. And then a phrase specifying the need. So what is it that you needs to be done? And that's kind of straightforward. The tricky part is the last part, which we call an insight. You want to come up with some, after you've kind of studied it, the question is, what's the insight? Which way should you go towards a solution? And that's really the kind of thing which you're taking a chance on. I will illustrate that more as we go on. Here's an example of something that happened in a class of mine which had a very happy ending. But the POV was Maria, a poor single mother, needs financial know-how so she can use her money efficiently. Now, the thing to understand is the chance in that. I mean, Maria is a person. She is a poor single mother, and she has financial needs. It turns out her life was a disaster. She doesn't understand that much about money, so she's in a sense taken advantage of by the system. She has no banking, so to cash her paycheck, she needs to pay a premium. She's paying too much for all the things she buys. She doesn't save money, et cetera, et cetera. So when the students interviewed her, they felt that the key was she'd have to understand more about money. Now, the insight implies that if she knew more, she would be okay. Now, that's a chance. It could be she's a spendthrift. It could be no matter how much she knows, she's going to still be a disaster financially. So that's the risk you take when you explore a solution. And in this case, it turned out to be a great way to go ahead, because with a little education, they tested the insight. We call it a prototype. And what happened in this case, it was a great success. They found that the woman, after 6 months, had saved 9% of her income. She'd saved $1,400 on an income that's less than $40,000 a year. And that actually blew the students' minds. And one student made the rest of his life essentially dealing with that issue. And they started a company called Juntos, which in Spanish means together. And it's a company where you don't need to, it gives you the privileges of using banking services without necessarily having an account, and it just requires an ordinary phone, not a smartphone, and it's won all sorts of awards and it's gotten all sorts of mention. And basically, right now, they're in 12 countries across 4 continents, having contracts where they go in between the banks with people that don't normally bank. So it's an example where they took a chance, and by providing some education, they saw it really worked with some prototype, and then they were able to implement it in a larger extent. So that's sort of a global kind of problem, but most of us don't deal with problems on that level. Most of us look at as ourselves and solve problems for ourselves. Now, in psychology, there's something called Solomon's paradox. And what that refers to is that King Solomon was a very wise king. You probably know some of the stories about his very sage decisions. But it turns out in his own life, he was a disaster. And the kingdom actually was lost because he didn't train his son properly, and many other disasters in his private life. So people refer to people who are wise and are very learned in the world, but whose personal life is sort of a disaster, as victims of the Solomon paradox. And to a certain extent, we all suffer from it, because I've found that I deal with a lot of intelligent people. And my question is, how come intelligent people like you get stuck and lose sleep over simple problems? And I've thought about that a long time. And, I'm not exempt myself. I lose sleep and I get stuck over simple problems. And I've always wondered, why is that so? Is that, the problems are not rocket science generally that stuck people. They're really very simple problems. And I've done hundreds of workshops around the world, and I've come to some conclusions as to what that's about. And my main conclusion is it's because they're trying to solve the wrong problem. And that brings us back to the importance of the POV. Now, what do I mean by that? It's if you're stuck. I found that if you're stuck, by and large, you're treating a wrong answer as a right question. Now, that's a little hard to understand, but you will in a few minutes. I'll give you lots of examples. So I'll give you an example in my own life, and you'll get the idea. So I had a visitor from Europe, and I wanted to show him the wine country, and I didn't have an extra car available to go away for a few days, so I rented a car. And I took him up to the wine country, and eventually we were running out of gasoline, so I pulled into a gas station, and that's where the problem started. I started to look for the button you have to push in order to open the cover on the gas tank. And I looked all over. I've had many cars in my life, and I know the buttons are either on the door or on the dashboard or in the glove compartment. I couldn't find the button. And I looked and looked, and eventually I pulled out the manual in the glove compartment, which the rental company had left there, and I started to read that. And then a miracle happened. The same car, same make car, pulled up on a pump near me. So I ran up to the woman. I said, you know, this is really a stupid question, but could you please tell me where the button is to open the cover on the gas tank? And she said, there isn't any. Just open the tank. At which point I felt really stupid. And I was able to just go over, open the tank cover. It wasn't locked at all, and put the gas. And and it's a trivial example, but it points out to the whole idea. What I was using was, I'd already, as a solution was find the button, use the button. And the problem was, how do I find the button? But that was the wrong problem. The question was really, how do I get the tank open? And I've had similar experiences many times, and I know probably you do. The feeling is when you get the aha, it's, oh, how stupid it is. Why I didn't realize it. The problem sort of solves itself. So that's an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. And the question is, how do you get unstuck when you're stuck in one of those dilemmas? And it turns out it's really simple. It couldn't be simpler. So let me give you two examples. And the rule is that you deduce from this is, don't use answers as questions. In other words, make sure it's really the question you want to answer, not some answer that you think is the question. So one example is, say you want to find a spouse, and you've done everything possible. You've been on the internet. In the old days, people used to go to bars, whatever you do, you've been fixed up by all your relatives, and nothing works. Nothing works. So at that point, you're stuck, right? And the question is, to get unstuck, what I would do is I'd say, what is it I would happen if I found a spouse? What would it do for me? Why do I want to find a spouse? And there are many different answers. Some are comical and so forth, but some are whatever. But let's say your answer was to get companionship. So you're asking yourself, the way you get unstuck is you ask yourself, what would it do for me? What would it do for me if I found a spouse? And let's say it's get companionship. The minute you do that, your solution space opens up tremendously, because now you're not necessarily worried about finding a spouse, because the real problem you're interested in is, how do I get companionship? And the situation now is one where there are many solutions that are kind of obvious to you. You could meet people in various places. You could take a class. You could get a pet. You can join a club. You could go to jail. You can go to the army. I don't know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens is I've opened up the solution space tremendously, and I'm solving the right problem. and it turns out if you had the wrong problem, it wouldn't even work. I had a similar problem once. I was actually giving a talk in front of maybe 200 people at Microsoft, and some woman I asked, "What problem are you losing sleep over?" And some woman bravely raised her hand, and she says, "I can't find a good man." Everyone chuckled, but the question is then. My question to her is, well, what would it do if you had a good man? And she said, again, she actually came up with companionship. She said, "Oh, I'd have companionship." Well, it's kind of interesting because I think of myself as a good man. I've been married for many years and all that. But one of the issues in my life is companionship because I'm busy working and giving talks to people like you. And so if that woman found me, she wouldn't get companionship to enough of it to satisfy her, probably. So the point is, if she solved the wrong problem, she found a good man, it still wouldn't give her what she wants. So there's two things. If you have a problem, you're stuck on it, the way to get unstuck is to just say, what would it do for you if you solve the problem? And that opens up, that's your new problem, what it would do for you. And that opens up the solution space, and which includes the original solution, which might or might not be good if you got it, but it includes others, which are usually very easy to implement. So that's the main idea. I'll give you another example, which is since you're all alumni of some schools, this happened with the Stanford alumni group. This woman's problem was she couldn't get her boyfriend to stop snoring. They had tried everything. They'd gone to doctors. If I recall correctly, he's even had a surgery and all that, and nothing helped. So she was stuck. So my question to her, what would happen if you got your boyfriend to stop snoring? And she said she'd be able to get a good night's sleep. So the problem is now, well, how do I get a good night's sleep? And then again, the solution space opens up tremendously. And there are much of these things, like you get earplugs, go to a different room. But the one I love best is, of course, change the boyfriend, get a different boyfriend. But you could take pills and so forth and so on. So the point simply is, if it's just a question of getting a good night's sleep, it wouldn't maybe even change it. Even if the boyfriend stops snoring, it might not help. If he stops snoring, he might become very active sexually, and she wouldn't get a good night's sleep. Who knows? But the point simply is, you have to deal with the problem, the real problem, not the thing that you think is an answer. And that's a great example to me, the snoring one. The other thing is interesting. I have problems when I do this with Stanford freshmen. I dread doing it because they don't understand that it's much better to disappear a problem than to solve a problem. So the point simply is, if the woman didn't get the guy to stop snoring, she hadn't solved that original problem. But if she got a good night's sleep, it's no longer an issue whether he snores or not. And that's such an important thing to understand. If you move to what I call a higher level and you solve the meta problem, the other one that you were stuck on just disappears. It's no longer an issue in your life. If you have companionship and you're happy with that, you don't have to have a spouse. So the point simply is, you have to be willing to let go of the original thing. And that takes something that freshmen can't do very easily, especially at Stanford. But usually when they're in graduate school, they understand it quite easily. And it happens many times. I had it in my own life. I was worried whether to retire or not and all that. And I was losing sleep over that many years ago. And finally I said, well, what would it do for me if I could decide whether to retire or not? And what happened is I could stop worrying about it. So what happened is I just decided to stop worrying about it. And I won't embarrass you by telling you how many years it is, but I've never thought about it again. I disappeared the problem about whether I should retire or not. It went away because I was able to deal with the bigger issue, was stop worrying about it, which was much easier. Anyway, let's go on. So I'll give you a few examples of projects we've done at d.school which involve this whole idea of reframing. So what we're really talking about is reframing the problem if you don't start out with a good point of view. And the method I've given you to reframe is simply ask what it would do for you if you solve the problem and make that the new problem. So there's a problem that came to us from doctors in Nepal. They had the issue of premature children, keeping them alive. It turns out if you're born prematurely, your body just doesn't provide enough warmth, and you need some way to do that. And the way it's done around the world, including in Nepal, is to use the device shown, which is an incubator, which costs around $20,000. And they had them in Nepal, but the problem is they require electricity. And in Nepal, the electricity is intermittent at best. And also, they were a little bit hard to maintain. So the problem came to us, how can we maintain these incubators and keep them working? And the students started to work on redesigning it to make it simpler so that it would be easier to maintain. And of course, they would use battery backups to take care of the electricity. So this is a simple prototype of some simpler device. But when they went to Nepal and India, actually too, they saw that in fact the doctors were not really the people they had to worry about. That the problem with the mother and the children, and the mothers may be up in the hills and they can't get to the clinics. These devices were in the clinics. So even if they did work, it wouldn't be something that they could handle. So really the user is a desperate mother in a remote village who cannot access a major hospital. Okay, and the need is to keep their dying baby, give it a chance to survive. And the insight the students had is that warmth does not need to come from electricity. Okay, and based on that insight, they developed something that looked like a sleeping bag. And you can see this was the first prototype up in the corner here, and this is more or less the final device down on the right-hand corner. And the idea is it's like a sleeping bag, and you can have it in the village, you can have it anywhere, it doesn't have to be in the clinics. And the trick is it has a bladder in it with a wax-like material which you can heat any way you can. You can boil it in water, you can use the sunlight, you can do it, and you could use electricity also if you had it, but if you didn't have it, there are many different other ways of heating it. And you put the bladder in, and the wax material in it melts when you heat it, and it takes about 4 or 5 hours for it to solidify again, and it gives up enough heat to keep the child warm for that period of time. So they had this successful idea, and then they went to India and Nepal to try it out, and the mothers hated it because they thought the child would look like a shroud. They thought the child was already dead. And eventually they hit on the idea that they had to put a window in it. And once you put a window in it, it made everything quite okay. And so they reframed the problem from making the machine work to saving the child. And the question is, how do you save the child? And there's many ways, and that's one, of course. And they ended up with, it's called Embrace, and this is more or less the way the final thing looks. And so far, over 300,000 babies have been treated with that. And they got a nice call out in the White House back in the Obama days. So it's an example of it was the wrong problem, and it was the wrong person they were solving it for. The problem was not, the doctors had their problem to keep the machines working, but that's not the real problem. The real problem was keeping the babies alive. And that's the beauty of reframing to get to the real problem. I'll give you another example. This came through a company, General Electric. That gentleman you see there, his name is Doug Dietz. He's a senior design engineer for the medical branch of General Electric, and they work in Wisconsin. And basically, he his designed MRI machines. You can see his design on the bottom here, but they're for children. They're not just general size MRI machines. They're especially made for children. And Doug designed a machine like that, his group did, and some months later he went down to a local clinic just to see how it was going, and he walked in, and the nurse couldn't have been happier. She, oh, we love your machine, you know, and he felt 10 feet tall. And then after a while, a child is being dragged in, screaming and crying, and the nurse says, "You have to leave." And he says, "Why?" She says, "Well, we have to sedate the child." And at that point, he finds out that they sedate about 85% of the children. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in an MRI machine. I know even adults have problems with it. My wife always takes Valium before she goes into one of them. So they're kind of, you know, scary. And he never realized how scary it is for children. So he kind of got really depressed about it. It was winter in Wisconsin, and people said, "Go out to California, take a workshop at d.school." And somehow when he came to us, what we do is we harangue people how important it is to be customer centered, to be human centered, to deal with the people you are designing for, deal with the people you're solving the problems for. And he realized all he had done is what is normally done. He had dealt with the other professionals. He dealt with doctors, he dealt with customer engineers and so forth. He'd never dealt with children. Why would you talk to children? So he went back and he got a hold of as many children as he could. He made an advisory board of chronic patients. He went to children's museums. He spoke to teachers and stuff. And they visit a lot of hospitals. And one hospital, they found a little girl who has cancer. And in talking to her, he found that she said something like her brothers have all these trophies and everything, and she, because of her illness, has nothing exciting in her life. You know, she's just always hospital bound, and it's been a long time. And what they thought is, what this child needs is some excitement in her life. And based on that, they changed the whole experience. So they went to what's called an adventure series, They went to what's called an adventure series. They didn't change the machine at all. They just changed the environment of the machine, and they reframed the experience. They reframed it from being a medical experience to being an adventure. And one of the machines looks like a pirate ship, and you have to hide from the pirates. You have to hold still for pirates. Another is underwater. Another camp, and they had a whole series of these, and it was very successful because the rate dropped from about 85% to about 1% people needing to be sedated, and they actually made knapsacks, and they made a whole joke book showing about looking at your body, and children were heard saying, "Mommy, can we come back tomorrow?" because they made it an adventure, not a thing. And what happened is Doug realized, from a child's point of view, looking at this machine, it looks like you're being asked to crawl into the mouth of a metal monster. And he feels it was cruel. He actually cries when he tells the story, because he didn't realize how it would look to the people who actually are going into the machines. So that's a beautiful example of just this whole idea of reframing and being appropriate to what the problem actually is. So in this case, you could say they refrained from make the machine work to either save or help, but mainly to delight the child. And that was a big, big, big insight. So that finishes my rule one. Make sure you have the right question. Make sure you reframe if you don't have the right question. If you're stuck, it's a very easy way to get out of it. There are lots of ways, but I like the one that says, what can it do for me if I solve the problem? Make that your new problem. And it works, believe me. It's worked in my life. It works in a lot of lives for people around the world. The danger in that is people tend to lie to themselves. So you have to, if it doesn't work, just try it again. It does work. And if it doesn't work, you're lying to yourself. You also have to use it. I have a colleague. I have a colleague who comes to a workshop I do every year, an exec ed workshop, and he sits in the back. And he comes up to me often. This repeats almost every year. He comes up to me and he says, Bernie, that's such a great method. I was just sitting back there and I solved my problem. Thank you so much. And I'm thinking, and I love him, and I hug him and all that. But basically, what goes through my mind is, why does he need me? I mean, why does he wait every year until there's the workshop? You can do it. You don't need me. You can do it yourself. So that's the point. So, you may think it's a great method. You may think it's a stupid method. It doesn't matter what you think about it. Try it. And if you try it, believe me, you'll find it's really useful. Okay, so that ends reframing and working on the right problem. The second thing is, okay, good, thank you. The second thing is to not use reasons. Now, it's really important to understand what reasons are. If you think about it, what is the purpose of having reasons? There's only one purpose, really, in my life that I can think of it. It is to have to seem reasonable, because there's no, and I'm talking about reasons for human behavior. There's no one reason for any human behavior. I mean, you're such a complicated being. You have DNA in you. You have environmental factors. You have all sorts of things that color your behavior, and it's impossible to have just one reason for it. When I'm being stupid about it, if I say to someone, well, the reason you did this is because your great-grandparents had sex. If they didn't have sex, you wouldn't be here, and you clearly wouldn't have done that. So that's stupid, of course. But what we do is we take a more germane thing that looks like the real reason, but it really isn't. And it doesn't really matter, except that often reasons are just simply excuses. And if you understand that, you understand a really important thing. So it kind of gets down to the following. There are many causes for whatever we do, and we choose the one that makes us look the best or is in the most coherent with our self-image. So if you have a self-image that you're a nice person, you're going to pick a reason that makes you seem like a nice person for whatever your behavior is. If you have an image that you're a nasty person, you're going to choose a reason that will make you seem like a really good, nasty person. So it really is a kind of funny thing. And if you think about it, it's just impossible that there'd be one reason for what you do. There are many books about these ideas. There's this whole idea of Kahneman's thing of thinking quickly, thinking slowly. But most of the time, we just do things, and then if you ask me what the reason is, we make up the reason. There have been tests where they put people into MRI machines, and they give them a task to do. And it turns out the part of the brain that fires the motor aspect of doing the task goes before the part of the brain that comes up with the reason for it. So, push this button, and then why did you push the button? And it turns out the why it gets created after you've seen what you've done. And so most of the things we do are automatic. On this talk, I don't know what I'm going to say next. It's just coming out of me. Most of our behavior is sort of automatic, or else we would die. We just can't handle everything in sitting down reasoning about every possible thing. So the point to understand is reasons are both not useful in general, and they're just simply excuses. So I've come up with the categorical statement, which is a little rude, but I like it. Reasons are bullshit. It's the best way to see it. The joke is in one department where my mail comes, there was a woman working who was sort of from the last century. She was very not modern. So, and this package of, I had a package of stickers made up, and they had on the cover the sticker showing the contents, which says reasons of bullshit. And she goes, oh, what a terrible word. And I go, yes, reasons. And really it comes down to it. Reasons are a terrible word. So what I do in my book and all that is I have this idea of calling a reason a good reason by spelling it with the 5 O's. So I say that's a good reason. And people in my environment, a lot of them take my workshops, and it's a kind of joke. If someone gets up and give a reason, the others will say that's a good reason. So we'll be in a meeting, and most of my colleagues are terrific, but I have in one department I'm involved in, there's a professor who's always complaining. So when he gets up and he'll say, well, the dean wouldn't let me do so and so, they'll all say that's a good reason, meaning it's bullshit. And the person gets the insight to think about that. So I'm just going to take a minute and give you that experience on yourself. Usually I have people work with partners. We don't have partners for most of us here. But I'd like you to think about, for example, why did you sign up for this webinar? What's the reason you did that? And just tell yourself the reason, and then tell yourself that's a good reason. And then think about some other thing you've done recently. Like in my case, I might say my mouth is dry now, and it always happens when I get to this part. And if I'd say, well, my mouth is dry because I'm talking a lot, and that's a good reason. Well, but I am talking a lot, so why do I say it's bullshit? Well, I don't tell you I drank a bottle of wine last night. I don't tell you I'm always dehydrated. My wife says I never drink enough. I don't tell you it might come from nervousness. There's many things that are causing my mouth to be dry, and I'm picking the one. Obviously, talking to you is the least embarrassing. There are a lot of times when I do have signs of not drinking enough. So I just pick the one thing that makes it seem okay. Now, as I say, it doesn't really matter all the time, but often these are excuses and they prevent you from doing stuff. So the main thing to understand is reasons are bullshit, but you cannot tell that to anybody. Do not try this at home. You will lose your relationships. So I never tell my wife her reasons are bullshit. I never tell my children their reasons are bullshit. I never tell my colleagues their reasons are bullshit except in a workshop. So the point simply is, if you want to fix the world, just fix yourself. Don't fix anyone else. It doesn't work that way. You're not here to fix them, but you are here to fix yourself. So what I realized, I got this epiphany some years ago. I was always late for stuff. And I was on the board of directors of a company up in Berkeley. And basically, I would always come late to the meeting. And I would tell them that the traffic was terrific on the highway. And it was. There was traffic on the highway. But after a while, and they would say, oh, we're glad nothing happened. It's okay, Bernie. But it wasn't okay. People had lives and they shouldn't be waiting for me. So basically, I realized I should either get off the board or I should be there on time. And I just changed my behavior immediately to always make it important enough in my life to be there. And that's the point with a lot of things, especially time things. They're just a matter of giving it enough credence in your life. As an example, if a student came into my classroom and he said, I'm sorry I'm late, Professor Roth, I got a flat on my tire, my bike tire. Even if it's true, that's the reason. If in fact I had a thing where if you come in late, you fail the class or you get kicked out of the university, the student wouldn't be late. You understand? So it's just a matter of making things strong enough in your life if you want to do them. Now, that's a really important insight. but you cannot share it. It's okay to tell people about it. This professor said this. It's not okay to tell them your reasons are bullshit. But if you look at it and you're aware of it, you'll see most of the time it's that way. And it's best not to give reasons unless you really have to. So I find a great example. I get an email from somewhere in the world, maybe twice a week, from some student who wants to come and do a PhD with me at Stanford. Nowadays, they come mainly from Iran and China, India, places like that. And in general, I don't know them. I don't even have to answer their email. But some of them they're not just dear professor, they've looked me up and they've seen my research and, they've put a lot of work into it. So I feel sort of bad about ignoring it. So what I used to do before I got this insight was give them a good reason that I couldn't take them. I'm going on sabbatical, I don't have enough money. And when I did that, I would always get pushback. Going on sabbatical, I can wait a year. How about I come a year from now or 2 years from now? Oh, not enough money. I have a rich uncle. He can lend me money and all that. And it just went on until I truncated. Nowadays, I don't give a reason. I just say, sorry, can't help you. Good luck. Actually, my phone knows it. It practically gives me all the words when I start to type it. And what happens is about 90% of the time I get back an email, thank you for answering my email, professor. And that's the end of the story. And I feel good about it. And I don't know how they feel, but it resolves it. So I feel it's really good to not give reasons unless you have to. So if someone presses you for a reason, I'm not a jerk about it. I'll give them a reason. And if it doesn't matter, it's all done and so forth. But if I realize it's a lie, and I realize I want to change my behavior, like being late to the board meeting, I may give the reason, but I'll say to myself, yeah, that's not true. That's a good reason. And I'll change it. Now, I won't change it immediately. I may repeat a few times, but ultimately I'll change it. But if I don't delude myself by thinking it's a good reason, if I think it's a good reason, then I will change it. If I think it's a good reason, I'll never change my behavior. And that's a really important thing to realize. So silence is better than bullshit. And you don't have to do it. I've had things where I had to discharge people and things like that. And if I just tell them what I'm going to do or not do, it's much better than giving them a whole bunch of bullshit reasons about it, because then they push back and it just goes on and on and on. So test it out. I guarantee you'll be happy with it. Okay. Now we come to rule 3. Rule 3 is having to do with trying and doing. Now there's this movie called Star Wars, which you're probably all familiar with. And there's this fellow called Yoda. And I always worried I'm going to be struck dead when I tell you Yoda was wrong. But so far it hasn't happened. There is a try. Yoda said there is no try, there's just do. I understand why they did it in the movie, and it was great, and I understand. But in real life, there is a try, and there's nothing wrong with trying. Trying is as good as doing. The problem is when you confuse the two. And this is really important to understand. It's questions, what is your intention? Is it just a pipe dream? If it's a pipe dream, it doesn't matter if you do it or you don't do it or you try. But if you have the intention to do it, you have to understand, are you willing to give it the attention it requires? So in order to do something, you need to have the intention to do it, and you have to give it the attention it requires. Now, there's a thing called velleity, which is this whole idea of, yeah, I want to do it, but, it's just too much work. I can't be bothered and all that. So really, you can break up the world into what we call a 2x2, where if you plotted attention on one axis, on the horizontal axis, and you plotted intention on the vertical axis, you could see if you have attention and intention, you're doing something. That's called doing. If you have the if you have the attention, but you don't have the intention to really do it, you're trying to do it. And if you don't have attention or intention, just a pipe dream. And if you really have the intention, but you don't give it the attention it requires, it's velleity. So you can be in any of these things, and they're all fine states. I mean, it just doesn't really matter. The problem is you confuse the two. And the ones that people confuse most are trying and doing. Uh, and when you are doing something, if you get an obstacle, it will not stop you. That's sort of the difference between trying and doing. If you're trying to do something and you find an obstacle, it'll generally deter you. You'll go on and do something else. But if you're doing something and you find an obstacle, it will not stop you. There's a great story that happened in my life that sort of explains it really nicely. Um, my wife and I were up in San Francisco. Our son lives there. We were visiting with him, and we started to drive home, and we drove past this movie theater in his neighborhood, which shows very unusual movies. It's called the Roxy Theater if you're in the area, and it's a dump. I mean, it's probably bug ridden and all that, but the movies are really very interesting. And we're driving by, and I saw the biggest crowd I've ever seen in front of that theater. I passed it many times. It wrapped around the block, and it was a movie about a musical group, and the group was going to be there also, it said. And I had never heard of them, but I figured it must be good because the local cognoscenti were there. So I said to my wife, let's go and see the movie. And she said, no, I'm tired. Let's go home. Let's go home. And eventually I talked her into it. And I said, well, you jump out and buy the tickets and I'll go find a parking place. So I did. And I came back about 10 minutes later. And she was standing in front of the box office, but was not online. And I asked how come she wasn't online, and she said they're sold out. I said, why not get tickets? She said, didn't you hear me? They're sold out. So I kind of said, you wait here, and I worked my way along the line, and eventually I came up with 2 tickets, and we went to the show. So the point was, my wife was trying. She was being nice to me. And the minute she hit an obstacle, sold out, she gave up. She tried. She had a good reason, right? No tickets. That's a good reason for not going, right? And but I was going to go no matter what. And it ended up, it didn't cost me any more than the advertised price, but I would have paid a scalping price if I had to. But was going to go. Now, and that was the difference between trying and doing. Now, the punchline on the thing is she was right. It was a terrible show. We shouldn't have gone. So doing may not be great, but there is a difference between doing and trying. And you have to understand that. And another example, where trying won out. I was obligated to go to a meeting in Dallas, Fort Worth to report back on some research money I'd been given. I was glad to have the money. I wasn't really looking forward to going to the meeting in Dallas, Fort Worth. I drove to San Francisco airport. A miracle happened. I got to the gate. All the monitors said Dallas Fort Worth airport is shut down. They're having a big snowstorm. All flights are canceled. So I called the people, apologized. They understood, and I went back home very happily. Now, I was trying to get to Dallas. If there was a snowstorm in Dallas and my life depended on getting there, I would have gotten there. Well, I don't know how. I would have rented a plane. I would have taken a car to somewhere. Somehow I would have gotten to Dallas. But since I was just trying, it was a pleasure to not go. So what I'm trying to say is doing and trying are fine. You just don't want to confuse the 2 states. Okay. I have a really good friend who was a Stanford student way back in the day. And he was on the swimming team, and he had an accident in the shower. He broke his back, and he needed a surgery. and the surgeon told him he'd probably never compete again. And it happened. He was very, very, very focused on getting to the Olympics. And he just went to a local reservoir, he trained. And eventually he just squeezed in. He was sort of the last person chosen for the team. And he went to the Olympics, and he won a gold medal, and he set a world's record. And he went back and put the medal on the surgeon's desk, who told him he'd never compete again. So the point simply is he was doing, and he's actually a series entrepreneur, and he's told me, that lesson with that whole swimming saga really set me up for the rest of life, because I knew that no matter what, I would do stuff. And if I got blocked, if there was some barrier or some block out in my way, I just found a way around it. And usually, in finding a way around it, it was a more elegant, beautiful solution than if I had gone just straight ahead. So the necessary things it took to find some new, unexpected way were in fact a present to me. And he's found that as to work in his life. So the main idea behind it is really you have to understand that there's a difference between trying to do something and doing it. And they're both okay. And it's okay to switch from the other. If I'm doing something and I have to kill someone to do it, and it's against my moral codes, I'm going to have to switch to trying. It's as simple as that. But basically, the harm comes when most people say they'll try and do something, which doesn't mean anything, and they really haven't committed to doing it. And you have to be sure which way you are. And as I say, it's okay to switch back and forth. It's just, in my world, not okay to think you're in one and you're really in the other state. Okay. So I want to say also, language is important to think about. There's all sorts of words that are really useful to use. It's much better to use and rather than but. People in improv know about that. It's much better to say you want to do something rather than you have to do something. It's better to say you will not do it rather than you can't. It's better to look for assistance rather than help, and so forth. It's not good to have shoulds in your life. There's a lot written about that, but it's useful to think about the words you use, because they do color your behavior. And the rules, so just to sum up now, we're coming to the end, is the rules in problem solving that I've kind of gone over with you a little bit this morning is: one, don't use answers as questions, don't use reasons, don't confuse trying and doing, and watch your language. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to answer your questions.
Great, Bernie. We've got several questions that have come in. I don't know if we'll have time to cover all of them, but we'll do the best we can. One is just on finding consensus with creating point of view statements, which you brought up earlier, and when people have conflicting point of view statements, how have you seen that most effective to manage?
Sure. Well, there's no one specific answer. It's a matter of prototyping different things. So there are different people involved. There's a specific people, there's the social effects of things. It's very complicated. So we've in cases solved a problem for one group of people, which has created a problem for a different group. It's a matter of, you just have to be, I say that the things are to be aware about it, like in the case of the students who got aware that the customers were not the doctors, but the mothers and children. Be aware of who you're really dealing with, and who you're putting foremost, and then be aware of any negative effects. But it's a matter of trial and error, and it's not just unilaterally. These things, it's, when I tell a story, it's a quick, nice story with a happy ending often. But in reality, there's a lot of storm and drang in all these things, and often you just get it happenstance. So it's just a matter of being aware, taking as many possibilities as you can, and not being afraid of failure. One of our mantras is it's okay to fail, and just fail forward, learn from failing. And that could be the best teacher. Just do it and try it out. Don't overthink it, and see how it works, and learn from that, from your prototype or whatever you want to call it, and then use that to make the best step forward.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Roth. Another question that's come in that I personally find very interesting is just asking about how to design your day successfully between work and if you're taking classes and social obligations, family,
Sure.
anything on that sort of time management side.
Sure. Well, I'd say the answer, of course, is individual. People prioritize different things, and I know in my life sometimes, the priority shift. When I write a book, I'm heads down writing the book, and my wife is not terribly happy that way. And other times, I'm more family centered and cooking and doing things. So I'd say but the main thing is to be aware of it, and to be aware of your environment and not be a jerk about it, and to realize whatever occupies you at the moment is not occupying the rest of your world, and to realize where you want to be in these things, and talk about it openly, and get some understanding. This whole life balance issue is a big issue. I feel most of the people I know handle it pretty much okay, but I think it's a matter of being, whoever asked the question obviously is concerned about it, and I think that's 80% of the game right there. And the rest of the 20 is a matter of just filling in what works for you, and it should changes with time. But you should just realize there are other people involved, and negotiate with them.
Great. Here's a more personal one that I think is interesting. Someone's applied a few times to get a PhD in nutrition, and they have an interest in, I guess, a passion for helping people to learn nutrition better and have a big impact there. And they haven't been accepted for that, and obviously they feel that path is the best way to go to achieve their goals, and they're wondering how could design thinking help them to solve that problem of, because they could presumably keep trying to get the PhD if that's the only path forward, but just other thoughts on something fairly binary. Either you're accepted into a program like that or you're not.
Well, if I understand the question right, that they're having trouble getting into a PhD program in an area. If that's so, I mean, there's different ways. One is, again, what would it do for you? It's exactly what we're talking about. What would it do for me if I could get into a PhD program? And let's say I'd be able to work and improve people's nutrition. From what you're saying, that might be a logical answer. Well, now, if you think of all the possible ways you can work to improve people's nutrition, it might well be that getting a PhD is even the worst way, not only the only way. So there are lots of ways you could work in giving people's nutrition. In fact, if you got a PhD, it might even get in the way of what you want to do because of the requirements. And if you're going to be a teacher, teaching might take away your time, or the research and stuff like that. So it seems to me it's a good example of someone fixating on getting married, fixating on getting rid of the snoring and all that. And if it's not working, then you just say, what would it do for you? And whatever your goals are, if you're not lying to yourself, you see a lot of people lie to themselves. They take something like getting a PhD, which they want to for ego reasons, and then they attribute it to some societal thing that they're going to do. But if you really want to do the societal thing, getting a PhD or not getting a PhD is not going to stop you. That's the important insight, I would say, that you could get from design thinking. And then that you could pick many of the different ways of doing it. And there are lots of ways. A lot of people who've done great work in every field don't have PhDs, believe me. And if you look at, some of the most successful people in the world never even graduated from college. So I hate to say that to an alumni group, but it's true. The college gives you a sort of license, and a PhD gives you a sort of license, but it does pigeonhole you in some ways. So that's what I would say.
Great. Bernie, we're almost at the top of the hour. We've got probably more questions certainly we can go through, but would you be okay with taking one or two and going maybe?
Yeah, sure.
Over?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
No problem.
Great. So we'll just be able to cover a few more here. One is just from a K through 12 teacher, just asking about how these can how this can be applied to educators.
Sure.
Specifically
Oh,
for
yeah.
K through 12.
Well, that's like a question that I must have paid someone to put in. At the D.school, we do projects from the world, and our longest standing projects is K through 12. We're actually paying about 8 people now full time to work on K through 12, and they do workshops with teachers, with school boards. We bring in children. We design curriculum, and it's really been amazing the effect on K through 12 in the work we've done. So I'd say if you go to the d.school website, Stanford d.school website, you should be able to track down the K through 12 people and see. You can get. They have a lot of stuff that they've done. But if not, if you send me an email, I could connect you with them. But there are miracles. There are stories like one teacher used design thinking to get reading levels changed in some group of, I don't remember, but it was in like 6 months. She got like 2 or 3 year reading levels changed just by getting them to read material that was germane to their lives, not Shakespeare or stuff like that. So it's very useful, and they're working with principals. We're working with schools around the world, in many countries. So yes, it's useful, and yes, you should get a hold of the work that's done in that area. And as I say, you can probably get it through our website, and if not, send me an email. I'll connect you.
Great. Well, that's certainly helpful for any of our teachers on the webinar. Another question is really asking about 2 things that maybe are a little bit in conflict in the presentation. One is and they're bringing up the specific example of the point of view statement for the Juntos people with the financial education for the single mother, and then bringing up kind of later in the presentation the idea of reframing issues to broaden the solution space, where basically a point of view statement is kind of limiting the solution space in a way. So how are those reconciled in the general case?
Well, there's nothing wrong with. I mean, it's a kind of iterative thing. It's like I'll give you an example. We had a group that went to Ethiopia to work on something, and they looked around and all that, and then they came back and they just couldn't find the right thing, and then there's a city, San Jose, near us, and there's a big emigre group there from Ethiopia, and they went there, and someone looking at the slides, a student pointed out that there's this cooking pan, and he said, that's my mother's most fond possession. That led to a breakthrough point of view. So the point is, you don't know where these things come from. And what you have to do is just keep looking and trying. And another project we were doing with pregnancy, and they were going to people's houses interviewing, and then as they were leaving, the husband opened the door. He says, everyone, when they talk about pregnancy, everyone talks about the wife. No one talks about the husband. And that was the breakthrough to go somewhere. So the point is, you don't really know where the breakthroughs come, and what you do is you just move forward and you try to do it. And sometimes limiting is good, but what we say is we change our modes. We converge and we diverge. We converge and we diverge. So that's what you have to do. We find it's really useful. So you come in and you can't work with everything, so you narrow it down, you get a point of view, and you check it out. Then you try to generate solutions, and that may lead to something else where you converge and diverge. So there's no like, each problem has an appropriate scale and an appropriate amount of thing, and it's not defined a priori. And it just happened to be, you know, the one with the Juntos, the full story is that the class happened, the students turned in their project, it was great, I gave them an A, and everyone went about their lives. And then one of the students, some months later, ran across, these women were janitors they were working with who spoke very poor English, so most of it had been done in Spanish. And the student ran across one of these women, the one we showed you, Maria, and he found out she'd saved 9% of her money. And that totally blew his mind. He immediately arranged to graduate. He's one of these students who never had a major. I got him out in like 4 months, and his rest of his life is he took his family's money, he started this company. So it kind of, it was all over for him, and then suddenly it opened up and it took a whole new path because he found the success, which was even, he knew that what he was doing was okay, but he didn't realize the magnitude of it. So it's one of these things that it's not all linear, and it's not all, you know, you do 1, 2, and 3 and you're guaranteed success. It's a matter of what we call bias towards action. Just do stuff and learn from failure and do what you want and change the size. Yes, converge, diverge, and yes, these things may be contradictory, but you have to just keep going ahead and hope you strike gold.
Great, Bernie, I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much for taking the time. We've got a lot of comments in just saying how much people got out of the presentation, so certainly appreciate that. The recording will be available for people to watch later if they missed that, so look for that in an email. And we also have a lot of other great webinars coming up in the coming weeks and months, so feel free to check back for what's coming up with that. But thanks again, Dr. Roth, really appreciate it.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.